Are you feeling anxious, overwhelmed, and disenchanted by life, the universe, and everything? Maybe you're frustrated with the talking heads who say one thing and do something completely different. Yeah, me too. Welcome to People Watching, a podcast where we figure out what it looks like to become the role model we've always wanted by talking with real people who found real role models in their own lives. Together, we cut through all the noise and identify better sources of hope, creativity, and wisdom as we explore how we learn to make decisions about the kind of life we want to live. So join us. Let's do some people watching. This is your host, Megan J. Robinson. I first met Cayce almost 20 years ago when she started attending a writers group that I helped to start. One of the things I've always admired about Cayce is her passion for social justice and community organizing, especially in the face of dealing with chronic illness. We explore Cayce's journey through non-denominational evangelicalism and her return to the Methodist Church, and how her faith shapes her activism in her local community. Cayce shared how she's worked through the sense of always feeling like an unwelcome prophet in the faith and political communities of which she's been a part. We also talked about discovering the constellation of witnesses and teachers across history, a community of ancestors who are still with us today as co-creators and guides in the work we do in the world. Talking with Cayce is always challenging and exhilarating. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Welcome to part 2 of our conversation. And now we're in the studio.
It's
Awesome.
fancy in here.
I know. Well, welcome to People Watching, Cayce. How are you doing today?
I'm okay. I'm happy to be here with you.
I'm happy to be here with you too. So one of the things I like to do with each guest is to start off by reading and sharing Touchstones, kind of pop-up rules that help shape our expectations for how we're going to show up for each other in this conversation. And so I will start with the first one. And Cayce, just know that whatever we share here tonight is by invitation, not obligation. And if either of us is not comfortable with pursuing a topic, feel free to just say, I prefer not to share. Thank you.
Okay. Also, silence is a partner in our conversation. So feel free to take a moment to reflect without immediately filling the space with words. Leave room for the inner teacher to whisper as well.
Awesome. And as we're here, let's just try to be present as fully as possible. And I want this and hope for this to be a space where we acknowledge our doubts, our fears, and our feelings, as much as it is a space to share our joys, convictions, and successes.
And we will ask open, honest questions. If we're not sure what the other meant in the question or statement, we're going to ask. It gives us a chance to clarify or rephrase and ask questions that we genuinely don't know the answer to. Surprise is a great catalyst for insight.
Hear, hear. I love it. Awesome.
I think what's opened up for me is this appreciation for the mundane. And that was something that I tried so hard to learn in my early years of parenting when I was between jobs or between activities and so consumed with just domestic life, which I am not super suited for. Physically very challenging, mentally very exhausting, and also not my source of super fun. You know what I mean? Like, I love my kids and that was great, but it was exhausting in those early years. And I tried to find some joy in the practices and and look for glimpses of the Lord in different aspects of the quotidian, as they call it. Um, and I just struggled so hard with that. But now, and maybe it is post-lockdown world, when we all had a minute to take a breath and consider everything. Um, I I appreciate that a little bit more. Like just kind of ritual and boring things come alive for me more than they used to. I don't have to go so hard in search of a profundity, you know what I mean? Like, it just pops up, and I think that's been really refreshing, and it's been really restful, right? Like, the striving is not so intense, and,
Mm.
um and it's funny because it's something that I always tried to get other evangelicals to do, like, to chill, you know? They'd be so I would have lots of conversations with women that I would be in, like, discipleship situations with where they were working so hard, straining at gnats, trying to find the sin that was holding them back or the whatever, whatever, and I'd be like, "Y'all, it's just calm down, you know? We we just think Jesus paid it all. What are you doing? Like, looking for extra debt?" And, it always made me a little, like, frustrated, and they would be so worried that they had done wrong or whatever, and, like, that's not how conviction works. That's not how the Holy Spirit works. It's not whack-a-mole. You pop your head up and bam, that's so not
Yeah.
how God deals with us, and, so, I preached that for years, but I think I still wasn't because it wasn't my practice, my active practice. Um, I was talking about something that I hadn't actually consistently participated in, and
Mm.
now I kind of have, and I appreciate it so much more. I mean, I can listen to a hymn or a really boring choir, a really dull choir, and appreciate the words or the effort or meditate on the fact that these people came to a practice earlier this week and they've been singing this song 10 times. And this is the 11th time they're singing this song. And they're doing it for us. And they're doing it with us in mind and with God in mind. Do you know what I mean? Like the layers of that become more evident to me now than they did before. Um,
Mm.
and so I appreciate it more. And I don't have to sit there and sift uh, through the things of daily life trying to find the the thing that's gonna offer me insight or light me up or motivate me. Um,
Mhm.
so it's kind of nice because to be like a more restful position, um, a more receiving position, faith-wise. So I appreciate that in this season. It's
Yeah.
really necessary because the work I do is tough and demoralizing sometimes and, can be a bummer. So, place where you can just be, you know?
Mm. There's a theologian, writer, Andrew Root. He's written a whole series, like 6 books now, on like faith in a secular age. So he's looking at different slices of like contemporary American Christianity. And his most recent book, he talks about, he's like looking at how historically we've kind of gotten the active life and the contemplative life. Everybody's trying
Mhm,
to either they're landing on one or the other, or they're saying, they're trying to find some sort of balance or tension, holding the two in tension.
mhm,
And Root's point is that there's actually a third way, and it's what you've just been describing so beautifully. It's the receptive life.
mm,
And it's, and that's that's been my word for this year, is to receive. Um,
Mm,
I was saying to my spiritual director a while ago, I said, I have always been the person. I find an obstacle, I will just find a way around it. Obstacles are just
mhm,
suggestions for alternate routes. Or if it doesn't work, I'll
mhm.
barrel forward. If it's a problem, I'll figure out how to solve it. If I need to, I will just brute force it, whatever. And nothing I'm doing
Yeah,
now works. None of that
yeah,
works.
mm-mm,
And
yeah,
I'm just going, I don't know what to do. And she's kind of like, well, do you need to do anything?
right, right, right. It's
And
so
um, one of the things that I would really love to kind of explore with you, because one of the things I'm curious about is how do we make the choices that we do in our lives, or how do we come to the moments or the intersections or the passions that we do in relation to the people in our lives, or the influence that others have, or the people that we find significant and meaningful. And I'm just really curious about with your journey of advocacy and justice and thinking about all of these different aspects of human life and what it looks like to live in 21st century America. Did you have any influences on that? What did that look like? Did it come from your family? Did it come from history? Did it come I'm just really curious.
yeah, I mean, I think all of that, right? Like um, we're all a unique set of experiences and influences and all of that. And I think um for me, I'm trying to think. So I would say part of my influence around justice in general was experience my experiences as a child with disabilities, um, and just living a form of otherness, a form of um, sometimes invisibility, sometimes uh, extreme visibility, vulnerability, all of that. Like, I think that really um, shaped my sense of that. But I have a really good friend who's an organizer and activist. She's more of an probably more of an activist these days. But she and I've talked at length about this, about how our disability interplays with our sense of of justice. And I think um, she says that the reason she focuses on things like racial justice or gender justice, LGBTQIA stuff is because when she spends too much time on issues of disability, it's too personal and it feels too hard. There's too much trauma tied up in that, personal trauma. And I feel that, but I also feel that being a person who grew up in the South in the 80s, racialized in the ways that I was, with liberal parents, but still all of those ideas in the air, not just in the air, but in the structures. When I was in elementary school classes that were heavily integrated, middle school classes that were heavily integrated. We get to high school, everything's tracked and and re-racialized. Um, so structurally even, having all of those input, um, I think for me made me very aware that racial nonsense was afoot. I mean, it was obvious. You're constantly confronted with it growing up, and you're either cooperative with your training or you're not. And there were many times in my training as a white person that I was just like, why? Or that doesn't seem right, And um so not to say that I lived some immaculate life, because I didn't. I mean, I had a lot of racialized ideas. I still do to this day that I have to reckon with. But there was enough dissonance there for me to question, like, what was up. And so, um, yeah. And then I also think that when I talk about faith influences, for me, my freshman year of college, one of the women, one of the moms, um, from my youth group had gifted us a copy of Oswald Chambers' My Utmost for His Highest. And I didn't have a devotion practice. I didn't really know how to do that as a new Christian. I didn't know anything about it. And so I started with that. And it was really helpful at giving me a place to go in the scriptures, something to contemplate, a perspective to contemplate, and like a way to work out building that practice. And not long after I started doing that, I went and got a Bible, and it was a women's devotional because I thought, well, I need more devotional variety. And as goofy as all of that was, and some of those devotions were just really, bless their heart, um, bless their heart devotions. It got me in scripture. And when I got into scripture, I was immediately drawn into and compelled by the story of Moses. Immediately. Okay. But I was immediately drawn to and connected to the story of Moses, right?
Mm.
The arc of Moses's life, the way that he um, felt a calling to speak up and say something, but super didn't want to do it, right? Like the reluctant prophet kind of stories. And the fact that he felt ill prepared, the fact that he felt, you know, slow of speech, and however you want to interpret that, whether that was like a disability situation, a speech impediment, somebody who just didn't think quick on their feet, however you want to interpret that. But the fact that there was some kind of thing that he felt insecure about holding him back, that I related to super, 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 super deeply. And the idea that you would be sent forward not for yourself, but in solidarity with these people
Mm.
who were your people, you know? That made a lot of sense to me, and that really resonated with me. And so a lot of the racial justice work I've done hasn't been from a perspective of charity or I'm going to step in here because I haven't been harmed in this way. Like there's an element of that. But there's also a sense that I'm fighting for my people. I'm fighting for my white kids. I'm fighting for my children of color. I'm fighting for um, the very conflicted family members that I knew growing up who meant well, but casually caused harm in a million different ways. The people who are locked in institutions that are harmful because they get caught up in a system that um, really designed to harm uh, people of color and poor people and all of that. Like the people in my family who've been caught up in that. And so I don't feel like I'm coming at it from from a place with no stakes of my own. Like I do have
Mm.
stakes of my own in that work. It's not a disembodied work for me.
Mhm.
Um, but it is a place where I feel um, a little more fortified and a little less personally traumatized to step into that. But because I see it so connected with disability justice, and so connected with gender justice, I mean, just, oh my God, to me, those things are all linked. So for me, it's kind of like, this is my piece of the cloth to tend. And so I'm going to pull on this thread. And if they're pulling on those threads and everybody's pulling on their threads, then, eventually the thing will come unravel. Um, and I've become more anti-capitalist, and that's because of the company I keep. I know that for sure. Um, but it's also because of, uh, and you might find this funny. It's also because I was a big sci-fi nerd, and Star Trek, until we get to Deep Space Nine, they didn't have no money. They weren't dealing with money.
Ooh.
And there's that one movie that's so beautiful where Alfred Woodard is like in the 90s and talking to Jean-Luc Picard. And he's like, yeah, we stopped doing that whole money business. We just decided to organize differently. And it was like, what? You know?
Yeah.
And there's lots of analysis to be had about Deep
Sure.
Space Nine and Ferengis and capitalism and all that. But yeah, I mean, Ursula Le Guin said that, um, capitalism feels inevitable, but so did the divine right of kings. And
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
super dead. So
Yeah.
there, I do fundamentally believe that we can imagine a different, a different kind of world for ourselves. And I
Mhm.
do think it can begin to mirror what you were talking about a minute ago with the gift economy, with the idea of stewardship of creation, of not extracting or
Yeah.
exploiting. Um, I mean, even the very idea of like earning your living, like you have to earn your life.
Right. Right.
That's
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah.
That's wild to me.
Yeah.
And yet we just take it for granted. So um I think a lot so yeah, so I think a lot about that. I've recently become um very interested in work that a person named Lynn Burnett is doing around identifying white anti-racist ancestors that we can claim
Okay.
and not hold up as not pedestal these people, but look at
Mhm.
their lives, look at their struggles, look at the ways that it informs our struggles. And
Mhm.
that's been very helpful.
Yeah.
Lynn has a whole thing on cross-cultural solidarity is Lynn's website, and it's really fascinating. And I found out once I started doing this work that I actually had relatives in um, Gaston County who were part of organizing mill labor in the cotton mills. And that was fascinating to me. So I'm actually reading a book right now about Ella Mae Wiggins, who was killed for trying to organize across race um, with the textile mill workers in North Carolina.
Okay.
And there's, you know, she wrote songs and things that Pete Seeger and other people covered later, like labor songs. But she was a mom with a lot of children, really,
Yeah.
and she was attacked by anti-union forces, and those kinds of stories don't get told unless the white person was like the hero that saved the day. Just the
Mm.
regular schmegular white person doing the struggle. That kind of stuff doesn't often get told. And when it does, it very much centers that person. So, and it doesn't look at them as part of a constellation of struggle. And so to me, that's what I'm kind of learning more about people who were in it together in
Mm-hmm.
conversation together, in dialogue together, not lifting any one person out and saying, well, that's the one, but looking at how they were interacting and what they were co-creating. Because
Mm-hmm.
that's really where, I mean, work is not, our friend Kat um, always says to me, work is not a disutility. It's not a drudgery. A lot of us do work that we enjoy. I mean, we have Wikipedia. People build Minecraft things that don't ever exist. Spend hours and days writing poems that nobody's ever going to hear because they love it. We are created to do work, and
Yeah.
it's not, we're not going to not work if we
Right.
don't have an extractive economy.
Right.
We're
Yeah.
doing this podcast. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, so I'm trying to look at that. I'm trying to look at examples of people who were connected in community and leading from a place of cooperation and collaboration and co-creation, and
Mm.
not um, acting as, some uh, heroic person, because I don't think that's how it's formed. I mean, even if you go back to like my story with Moses, it, would there be Moses without Aaron and
Right.
Miriam?
Right. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
even in that, even though Moses is the one that gets held up, um, there was a community there,
Yeah. Would you have
and that
Joshua
community
later?
carried forward, right? And that community carries forward without us, which should humble us a little bit, when we're thinking about being role models. Like, the show will go on when our turn is
Yeah.
over.
I think
No, go ahead.
that's really helpful. One of the things I've been thinking about in terms of like influence and with regard to like who do we look at? Like who do we either kind of absorb just by osmosis, or who do we look at and go, oh, okay, like that's someone I'm going to consciously pay attention to and model myself after. And I've been thinking about proximity so much in terms of like geography and physicalness, and that's a
Hmm.
huge part of it. And I've been trying to think a little bit more about what you've just been describing, like historical, not historical figures, but historical figures in community, because it's kind of like,
Hmm.
you know, we run the risk when we look at historical, far distant figures or fictional characters, even, we run the
Hmm.
risk of idolizing them, of putting them on a pedestal for
Hmm.
because of the fact that we only have parts of their life. We do not have access to
Oh
them
yeah.
as a whole person. We have access to what they shared, we have access to what other people shared, but it is in that company that they keep that we get a much better
Hmm.
sense of the wholeness of the whole person, but also the real influence that that person had. I always think, I hate that
Hmm.
question, like, what do you think your strengths are? What do you think you're best, you're best at? And I'm like, I don't know.
I know. I
And,
know.
and so I think about, so I love how you were describing those figures as part of a constellation, um, as
Yeah.
and the influence on and from and within the community, and what that community was then able to do. And
Yeah.
it wasn't solely because of the work of one person, or the most visible
Right.
figure. I think about that a lot too, actually. Having a hidden life, um, or doing work that feels hidden as I'm doing it. It
Yeah.
feels like, uh, does anybody care? Is anybody paying attention?
Yeah.
Is this doing anything? You know, that the mic
Mhm.
tapping the buffer. Is this thing even on?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
um,
Well, it's interesting what you're saying. I don't wanna, like, interrupt your flow, but, earlier when I was talking about, finding, like, the profound in things that are mundane, along the same lines, um, finding peace and joy and excitement in obscurity
mm,
is
yeah,
really something that's kind of coming up a lot for me too. Because the when you there's so much that, um, our culture has given us as far as individualism, idolizing the lone actor, that kind of thing, and it's just not the way that most cultures in the world work. Most cultures in the world are more collectivist. They do have a sense of history. They do have a sense of ancestry. I so basic white lady confession. For a long time in the kitchen, I had over our back door the gather sign written in script, right? Like so basic white lady Pinterest. And yeah, you know what I'm talking about. They're
yeah,
everywhere.
yeah.
And so I decided to take it down, but I was trying to think of what I would want to put there. Like, what do I want to convey to the kids and to the family about our lives? And I think what what really hit me was often when I'm at these multiracial functions and actions, there will be someone invoking ancestors, right? Someone who's saying the ancestors are guiding us, the ancestors are with us. Even recently in some of the ceasefire work, um, there's been a particular song by Batya Levine that talks about, the ancestors surrounding us, the young people are with us and guiding us. This sense of like looking around and naming all the influences and all the power and all the beauty in the community. And so I took down my gather sign and instead I put up this big mural-y thing. It's not really a mural, it's just some painting I got at Goodwill that I painted over with clouds. And then I picked pictures of people who were poets, artists, activists, theologians, a whole slew of folks. Some people just living their lives and living it differently than other people at the time, being, bold and unapologetic about their life. And I printed all that out and then I decoupaged it on the decoupage the right word? I think. I don't know. I glued it
Yeah,
with
yeah.
some glue
Very, very,
and then I
very busy
sprayed
white
over it.
lady craft decoupage.
Yes. Yeah, it's very craftsy. And I'm not artsy, I'm not craftsy. I do some little cross stitching, but that's mostly, hobby stuff for fun. And and I had printed out some lettering for it and I put up there uh the scripture in Hebrews that talks about we're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses.
Mm, mm,
And I put fix our eyes on Jesus and then that verse. And I wanted there to be a representation in our home that we're not doing anything alone. None
mm.
of us are doing any of it alone.
Yeah.
And we have to remember that. I'm not doing anything on my own. My bootstraps are tied by other people. I don't, that's how it works. This interdependence is how it works. And that's
Mhm.
something that I've always kind of understood as a disabled person, right?
Yeah,
Like there are times when me existing and functioning relies on other people. But the truth is, that's true of everybody. You
right.
know, we wouldn't have these computers in front of us had not been the contributions of other people, and in many cases exploited, but those people participated um in giving us what we have. And So we can't, none of us do it on our own. And so like you said, you can't pull one character out of the scene and the context because none of us operate alone. We all operate in the context of community. And
Yeah.
so trying to figure out how to widen my cultural understanding for myself and other people of like, what is community? How do we build that? What does that look like? Who's left out? Who's included? Who's getting a turn? Who's not? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
trying just to figure out those basic kind of playground rules. It, um, it's interesting work to me, and it's very
Yeah.
behind the scenes. You don't
Yeah.
always, I mean, sometimes you get out there with a bullhorn for it, but a lot of times it's flipping emails, it's
Mm.
Google Forms and spreadsheets. You know what I mean? It's very,
Yeah.
there's a lot of it that's completely unseen.
Yeah.
And I actually kind of dig that too. I'll get out there
Yeah.
with a bullhorn, but I also like writing an email that maybe 3% of the people will read.
Right. Yeah.
We
I'm
actually do
I'm
better than that with our email, but
let's hope so.
our stats are our stats are much better than that. But you know what I'm saying? Like you don't
Yeah.
know who's
Yeah.
clicking what.
Yeah. It's a very, very small fraction of any email list that actually,
Oh
I
yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember I do remember this from seminary. The first semester we took a class on Bible study methods and hermeneutics, which sure, fine. And and I remember that the professor, he said one day, because the class happened to be on a Monday morning, and he said, "Okay, how many of you went
Mm.
to church yesterday and heard a sermon?" Everybody raised their hand. What were we going to say? And so everybody raised their hand. He goes, "Okay, how many of you remember the main point of the sermon?" And probably 50% of the
Mm.
people put their hand down. And he said, "Okay, how many of you, or, like, how many of you remember the 3 points of the sermon, whatever?" And, 50, okay, how many
Yeah.
people remember the point of the sermon, like what the pastor wanted to say? And, another 30%. And then he said, "Okay, how many of you did something with what you heard?" And everybody's hand went down.
Yeah.
And he just kind of like,
Yeah.
he goes, "Welcome to ministry."
Wow, that's
And I remember saying to a friend of mine one time, "Have you ever thought of going into ministry?" So his reaction was like, "Oh, maybe I am, maybe I would go into ministry." And then it's like, I don't
Mhm.
know. And I said, "Well, just know that it's hell if you're not called, and it's hell if you are." And
Yeah, right.
I mean, either way. And I feel like anybody listening to
Yeah.
this is going, "Why are you people in this?" And it's like,
Are we such a downer?
right, right. And, but I have to say that I never thought my road to ministry was gonna look like the typical road. It
Typical. Yeah. Yeah.
I
Same.
was never interested in being a pastor of a church. I was never interested in being a preacher. I was interested in art and writing, and all research is me search. And my going to seminary was an effort at trying to bring together creativity and theology, which, oh, by the way, those things should never have
Mhm.
been separated in the first place. Like, so my road to ministry is looking like very much like you know what? I'm tired of jockeying for a place at the table. I don't
Yes.
even want the table. I don't even want the table
Yep.
anymore. I very much feel like I am out in the wilderness with the machete and just cutting a place, just cutting down the path. And that is that background, that is that work, thankless work, unglamorous work of s- staying true to the voice that called you
Mhm.
and doing what you have to do to keep hearing that voice as clearly as you possibly can.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that feels quite often very, very foolish.
Well, I always tell when that pastor told me about, the prophetic
Yeah,
whatever,
yeah,
I was like, "Okay, let me go through my prophets in my brain. Who's oh, there's Jeremiah who wanted to die."
There's
Like right
Jonah
out the
who ran
top. I'm
away.
like, "Oh, that sounds great.
Yeah. There's Jonah who
Just
ran
kill me
away,
now." Or
swallowed by a
yes,
fish.
and
I
then
don't want to,
yep,
like, I would
and
rather
at
be swallowed by a fish than go
and
talk
at
to
the
those people.
and at the end of the day, he still didn't like those people. He still
Mm-mm,
didn't like them even after
mm-mm.
they came around.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
that's just, but
yeah.
it's like but there's something in what you just said about hearing that voice and being true to that voice. And there's something about hearing that. There's nothing better. There's
No,
nothing better
mm-mm.
than that sense of being seen and
Hmm.
being purpose and being but being seen and being told, yeah, you're in it. You're with me. We're all doing
Mm,
it together. And even when you're slogging through like that and you got your little machete, like you're still you're still using that time to connect with other people. And that's still building your community. And it's so cool because a podcast just expands that to who knows who.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm excited for you. I think this is a great time for you.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's really the last 8 to 10 years of just so much socio-political shenanigans. Let's use that word. Honestly, I'm so proud of myself. I am not cussing as much as I normally do. Um,
Shen
but
Shenanigans.
but
Such a good word.
it's such a good word. Is and not just the bigger national socio-political shenanigans, but just the constant stories of abuse of different kinds from people in
Mhm,
power, um, and
mhm,
just the utter failures and utter dichotomies between what was said and taught and expected of everybody else and how the speaker behaved. Um,
mhm.
and it's just been so incredibly. I remember saying to a coworker of mine at the time, we'd heard one more story of some leader failure,
Yep.
and I said, I am just so tired of looking around and not finding people that I want to admire. I'm so tired of this.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is hubris or what, but I guess I'm just going to have to become the kind of person I want to admire. Like, nobody else is doing it. And I was thinking, and the thing is, we have gotten so used to looking out there at people out there on
Mhm,
TV and on the computer and on these bigger fields. And we have forgotten that there are people all around us that are the kind of people we want
mhm,
to admire, that are the kind of people that we can learn from, that are the kind of people that, you know, might not be who we thought we would be in community with, but are exactly the people who are going to help us take
mhm.
this journey. And we're going to
Yeah.
be we're going to be able to help each other become who we were created to be. And that's
Mhm.
really why I wanted to do this podcast and why I'm starting with people I've known for years. And I'm just like, oh, wow, I'm learning all kinds of things. This is fantastic. But I
Yeah.
want us to go, oh, okay, I know someone like this in my community and I can learn from them.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. We have teachers all around us. We have teachers all around us.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
back to that being open. Are we
Yeah.
open to receiving?
I'm reading this book very slowly, as I read all of my books these days. This book, Priests of History, and she's basically talking about how do you steward memory and how do you steward history in an ahistoric
Yeah.
age. And so I was thinking about that
Mhm.
when you were talking about in your work in the community, just a lot of like remembering ancestors. I just love how you brought in that cloud of witnesses into your home. I think that's who did you put? Like, do you remember who all you've put?
A lot of different people. Yeah, I put a lot of different people somewhere on my computer. I have the list because I wanted to be able to tell the kids who people were. And some of the people I wasn't as familiar with their faces. I was their work. Um, but like Audre Lorde, um, the prophet Deborah, the judge. I found a image rendering of Deborah. Um, let's think who else. I put a lot of people on there. Ann Braden, Ella Baker, Harriet Tubman, um, Grace Lee Boggs. A lot of organizer activist types, but I also
Mhm.
put some theologians on there as well. Thomas Merton,
Yeah.
um, Polly Murray, you know.
Mm.
But yeah, it's a mix, it was a
Yeah.
mix of people that I
Yeah.
tried to include across disciplines.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so but yeah, I wanted there to be a sense in what I do and in what we do as a family um
Mhm.
that we never forget that we never forget that. There's
Yeah.
people rooting for us, there's people offering wisdom, you know.
Mhm. Mhm.
We're surrounded by teachers. It's
Yeah.
just yeah.
Yeah. I know you've mentioned sometimes it's disheartening, it's discouraging to do the work that you're doing. And you also mentioned how you believe that we can imagine different futures. There is a media theorist, Marshall McLuhan, and he has a quote that I love. It says, "Nothing is inevitable so long as there is a willingness to contemplate." And
Mm,
so, yeah, so I think that your constant invitation to other people to contemplate what's going on and to contemplate the systems and structures, I think is really necessary, really important. I have two more questions. What was
okay.
most helpful? What was the most helpful thing for you in our conversation today?
Um, Let me think. This is where I'm applying that silence rule. Um, I think it was helpful to kind of work through some of the entry points I had to the work that I do, but also um like what I'm currently learning, right? Because like what's present for me right now. And that's been I've been doing a lot of work around that this summer, and so for me it's really grounding to think that through a little bit.
Mm, awesome.
And I always just like talking to you. You make my
Ditto.
brain stretch.
Ditto. No, I am friends with such amazing, smart women, and I always feel like I am just
Right?
like I always feel like I am just like scrambling to keep up. So I love it. This is, likewise. Thank you.
Same. Same.
Um,
It's
and
mutual.
then last question. All right, last
Yes.
question. What's the story
Mm-hmm.
of the best or the worst taco you've ever had?
Mm. Yikes.
Or the
I don't
last
know if
taco
I've
you
ever
had?
had a mem I don't know if I've ever had a memorable taco. I'm trying to think. Oh, okay, so I will tell you about a good one that surprised me. I went to somebody's house for like a church gathering thing, in the evangelical days. And there was a she was serving tacos. And I was getting up there expecting, white people taco night. And she had marinated fish and all kinds of stuff. And uh it was and I was just like it was another one of those moments where Northern Virginia just pulled me right out of the land of, you know, I don't know, whatever we ate growing
Yeah,
up. Just
yeah, yeah,
kind of yanked me out of the SpaghettiOs of my childhood and said, "You're gonna eat something that looks a little weird and it's gonna be delicious." And it super was. And I
yeah.
remember coming home and I replicated it with the family, and I don't have the recipe anymore. And she also used a marinade at Wegmans that was delicious and is now not
Yeah.
in Wegmans anymore.
Ah,
It's a bummer.
yes. That is one of the
I know.
things I miss
But
so much about
a
Northern
fish
Virginia is
taco,
just, oh, fish tacos. Love
yeah.
it. Yeah, just,
Because it just I would not order that. Like, if it was between chicken and beef and fish, I'd be like, "Meh." I'll eat fish when we go to the beach, and it
sure,
better be
sure.
fried. But,
Right. Yeah.
yeah, for me to eat, broiled marinated fish that was, had cabbage and what did she honestly, I don't even know if there was cilantro on it. There was no
Okay.
cheese.
Okay.
And I'm like, "A taco with no cheese. What is happening?" But like I said, I was a product of white people taco night, so what did
Yep.
I know?
Yep. Yep. Awesome. I
But
love it.
yes, that's a memorable taco that I actually ate.
Love it.
But
Love it.
yeah, I've
A
been in
good
the
fish
presence of
taco is
people eating yeah, yeah. No, it was solid. It was really good.
awesome. Well, Casey, where
Man,
can people
now I miss
find
that
you?
taco.
I know. Now I'm hungry for a
Oh
taco.
God, please don't find me.
Oh, well, is there any are there any sites or resources where people can follow up with the work that you're doing?
I would say if they want to follow the kind of work that I'm doing, surj.org, surge.org, showing up for racial justice, is the national organization. And I'm part of a chapter as well, but the national organization really kind of sets the tone for a
Okay.
lot of the work that we do, across the board.
Okay.
So that's a great place to connect and get invested in white people doing racial justice stuff and solidarity and accountable to racial justice movements. But I'm trying to think if I have any other public fora,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I can't say go to Twitter anymore because Twitter sucks.
Yeah.
So I would say become one of the many. Join, I sound like a Borg now. Join the collective Don't
Resistance is futile.
don't come don't come looking for me. Find your people.
Okay.
And yeah, I
And
mean
search could
honestly,
be,
find your people.
yes.
That's what I was
All
search
right.
what could be your people, but you know, uh, I guess it's kind of funny because that is what I would say is I would encourage people to find their people um and then fight like hell for their people. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Well, Casey, thank you so much for your time and conversation and being awesome.
Thank you for being awesome and for talking to me and thinking of me for this. This is fun.
Hey,
You should do more of these
I'm planning on
with
it.
other
And,
people.
maybe thank you so much for spending time with us today. I hope you found something that resonated with you and that helps you become more hopeful, creative, and wise in your own life. Please share this with someone who you think would love this conversation and like, subscribe, and leave a comment or a review to boost the show. Shalom.